emulators were used in the production of this podcast.
Where did you learn to podcast? That good?
That's awesome, sweetie. Thank you.
Welcome to the Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast, where we discuss Atari's last home video game console and what it plays, one game at a time. I'll be your host for this episode. My name is Shinto, and if you don't mind, I'm going to feed your head to the web. Not the World Wide Web, a different web. Not a spider web either, or that tangled thing we weave when first we practice to... You know, why don't I just talk about the game? And that game is none other than part number J9010, Tempest 2000. Tempest 2000 is a 2MB cartridge developed by Llamasoft and released by Atari in April of 1994. It's an abstract shooter, a tube shooter for 1 or 2 competitive or cooperative players, and carries no ESRB rating. This is a remake, or rather an update, of an earlier game, a color vector arcade game called Tempest, developed by Dave Toyer and released by Atari in 1981. Looking at how his name is spelled, you might think it's pronounced Thurer. It certainly looks like Thurer, but I went searching for a definitive source on the pronunciation of his name, and Midway Arcade Collection 1 for the PlayStation had a history of Atari video, and went with Toyer as the pronunciation, so that seemed reasonably authoritative. Toyer you may also know from one of his prior games, Missile Command, released the year before. That's right, Dave Toyer wrote Missile Command, not Mr. Morimoto, the latter being an invention of the TV show Chuck, second season, in an episode entitled Chuck vs. Tom Sawyer. Now, Chuck is one of my all-time favorite TV shows. My wife and I thoroughly enjoyed it both times through, but there are some liberties taken with that episode. It's just as well. I guess they couldn't very well blow up Dave Toyer at the end. Bishop? Spoiler alert?
Oh, it is too late for that.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Tempest was inspired by a movie Toyer watched in the 5th grade, where monsters climbed out of a hole to the center of the Earth to attack humans. That imagery stuck with him over the years, and came to salvage a first-person Space Invaders type of game that he was working on. A prototype of this first-person Space Invaders, which was about 50% complete, received a lukewarm reception from Atari engineering and marketing, and arcade games that were simply okay weren't good enough for Atari at the time. They wanted only the hottest standout games going into production. So Toyer basically took Space Invaders and wrapped it in a cylinder, a 3D plane with its vanishing point in the center, kind of like looking down a hole into the earth through which the monsters emerge to attack, and you fight them back. It's not just circles, though. Different levels had different shapes, like triangles, squares, and other more complex shapes that may or may not be completely enclosed. There were 16 different designs in the arcade game used throughout 99 levels, and you faced up to 7 different types of enemies. Well, 3 of those 7 were tankers, which would contain 2 of an existing enemy type. The enemy types were red flippers, multicolored fuse balls, green spikers, and light blue pulsars. They emerge as tiny dots from the vanishing point and move up towards you along the shape, the playfield. The arcade game is controlled with a weighted spinner and 2 buttons. The spinner is a knob which can spin smoothly with quick and accurate changes in direction owing to its large encoder wheel and good feel of mass. It controls a yellow claw or blaster at the upper rim of the playfield, moving back and forth or all around. Since the spinner is weighted, you can fling it around and it would keep spinning for a short time, or if it was not properly lubricated, it would wobble and stop. The playfield, or web as it's informally known, is divided into corridors or lanes leading all the way down, and the corridor currently housing your blaster is outlined in a matching yellow. There's a button to fire, and a button for the Super Zapper to destroy all enemies on the screen. You can actually use the Super Zapper up to 2 times in a level, but its effect is greatly diminished the second time, taking out only 1 enemy. As you complete 1 level and move on to the next, you are granted a Super Zapper recharge. Tempest was Atari's first color vector game, quadrascan color, they called it, and what that essentially meant is bright, vibrant, glowing colored vectors, which were a big step up from the monochrome vector games like Asteroids, Lunar Lander, and Omega Race, the latter also landing in arcades in 1981. Vector games, you can't really do them justice in emulation. It's an entirely different display technology than what you would find on your TV, your computer, and whatever device is playing this podcast episode. Instead of drawing grids of pixels, as on a common raster display, an electron gun would draw lines on the screen. It might not sound exciting, but these are straight, perfect lines, not blocky, jagged lines like on a raster screen. These really stand out on a black background, and especially in color, it looks phenomenal. Like tubes of neon, they can twist into different shapes or rotate and change size with perfect smoothness and fluidity. If you're a fan of vector games, then be sure to check out the Vectrex Radio podcast, a game-by-game style podcast about the GCE Vectrex, hosted by Indie Soul and Willie. At least it used to be. I love vector games. I wish I had a Vectrex, so that this podcast can fill me in on exactly what I'm missing. Dang it. Tempest was a big hit in the arcades with 25,000 full-size cabinet sales and over 29,000 total machines if you include Cocktail and Cabaret. It ranks number 10 on the Killer List of Video Games' top 10 most popular games, tied with Centipede, and behind such classics as Tron, Defender, Asteroids, Dig Dug, and Ms. Pac-Man. On a gray and rainy April day in 1983 London, a Tempest cabinet caught the eye of 21-year-old video game developer Jeff Minter. He ducked into an arcade near Piccadilly Circus to avoid the rain and was drawn to the beautiful glowing vectors of this cabinet in the corner. This Minter chap, he'd been developing video games professionally under his own label for about a year at this point, but before the age of 16, he didn't have much interest in computers at all. His strengths in school were physics, math, and English, but he signed up for a computer class in his first year of sixth form college. Now, you'll have to forgive me, I'm not terribly familiar with the education system in the UK, but from what I gather, sixth form college comes after secondary school, so for an American analog, secondary school would be grades 6 through 10, and sixth form college would be like the American grades 11 and 12, though possibly at a separate facility and geared toward being a transition point to university. I could be wrong about that, sorry UK listeners, and I also say math instead of maths, because the latter sounds weird, an unpleasant combination of consonants at the end. But at any rate, Mr. Minter signed up for this computer class and attended a grand total of 2 lessons before giving up on it and focusing on his main studies. It wasn't a terribly interactive experience, this class. They would write a couple lines of code on pieces of paper using capital letters and little squares, and these papers were gathered up, mailed off, typed in verbatim by some computer operator, and a week later, the students would get the output of their program, or error, as the case may be. Not terribly high-tech. Video games were gaining popularity at this time, Pong and its mini clones, Space Invaders, and Minter was fond of these, so he was intrigued when he saw a machine at college playing what kinda looked like a video game. When he asked the guy playing the game how it got in there, the guy said that he typed it in. I'm a parent, as you may know, and I watch a lot of animated movies with my kids. I might venture to say that this moment might be summed up with
light bulb.
The machine was a Commodore PET 2001, an awesomely retro-futuristic looking computer with grid-like keyboards that kind of looks cool but provided a miserable typing experience. You don't touch type on a PET 2001. But it's way better than writing everything down on paper and waiting a week to see the results, so Minter really got into it, checking out books on the basic programming language which was built into the PET, going to college early to get some time on the machine, working on it at lunchtime, and learning from other students who quickly became his friends. They would cluster around the machine, either writing code or watching somebody else write code, learning new tricks and writing games and saving them on cassette. Basically hacking in the classic sense, finding ways to expand their knowledge of the PET and do cool things with it. As Minter's games became more complex, he moved beyond the confines of BASIC and started getting into 6502 machine code, which produced code that ran orders of magnitude faster than BASIC. The ratio of 6502 code to BASIC code gradually increased. With arcade games like Space Invaders and Galaxian and Targ and Starfire all the rage at the arcades, it made sense that they would try to make versions of these games on the Commodore PET, and while his college eventually got a second PET, a later version, Minter really wanted a computer of his own. The Sinclair ZX80 came out, and he eventually put together the £100 to buy one, trading up to a 4K ZX81 about a year later. On this machine, Minter wrote a few simple games, a point that he mentioned in a chat with a vendor at a ZX Micro Fair, a little computer show based around the Sinclair computers. The vendor seemed interested, so Minter fished out a cassette tape which held some of his games and loaded them up. The vendor was DK-Tronics, who published software and developed hardware for the Spectrum, hardware like a 16K memory expansion. The vendor offered to buy some of Minter's games to resell, and handed him one of their 16K RAM packs, a rather expensive piece of hardware, free of charge. Minter created a version of the Atari arcade game Centipede, a game which he had not actually technically played by that point, but nevertheless this version was well received. He moved up to a Commodore VIC-20 at home with a real keyboard and actual sound hardware. In late March of 1982, Llamasoft was formed. Why llama? Minter had been fond of camels since the age of 14 and found a book in the trash while working as a janitor in an office building, and this book mentioned a vicuña, which is a type of South American camelid. He did some research and learned about a number of interesting related animals, including alpacas and llamas. I won't mention the context in which the vicuña was referenced in that book he found. Llamasoft gained some early notoriety with a game called Bomb Buenos Aires. The game itself was a fairly basic design in those days. You fly over a city, gradually decreasing in altitude, dropping bombs to level buildings so that you can land safely. Britain and Argentina were engaged in a territorial dispute at that time over the Falkland Islands. You know, the kind of dispute that involves huge delta-winged Vulcan bombers. As a little joke, Minter put waving Argentine flags on the buildings and played a rendition of Rule Britannia when you land. Thanks to this game, Llamasoft became an award-winning development studio, winning the 1982 Bad Taste Award. It's not necessarily the type of notoriety you might want, so Llamasoft needed something big to establish itself. Minter was a huge fan of the game Defender, still is, I'm sure, and he created a version of the game for the VIC-20 as Llamasoft's first proper game, something in machine code and not just variations of existing basic games. His parents were a big part of Llamasoft at that time, and they helped out duplicating cassette tapes of this game named Defenda in advance of a Commodore show where they had a little vendor table. They made about 200 cassettes, and sold out on the first day. Minter had to call home to get the cassette assembly line fired back up so that they would have something to sell the rest of the show. Defenda was changed to avoid copyright concerns. Humanoids were replaced with llamas, and the game became Andy's Attack, which was released in the US under the name Aggressor, and became Llamasoft's first big hit. Llamasoft released games on a wide variety of machines: Commodore 64, Atari 8-bit, Amiga, Atari ST, even MS-DOS. These last three platforms seeing the popular shareware game Llamatron. Llamatron 2112, a take on Robotron 2084, started out on the ST and gave Minter some good inroads with Atari. He worked with Atari UK in the 80s to publish some of his titles like Photon Storm, and with Atari US to develop one of the first games for the Falcon 030 computer, which was Llamazapp. He worked up some demos on the Atari Panther, see episode 1 of this podcast for more on the Panther, and attended Atari's first UK developer conference for the Jaguar in 1992. At this conference, Atari was listing off some of their prior games, intellectual property that they owned, and that they thought might find new life on the Jaguar. When they got to Tempest, Minter signed up.
That was a long way to go just to get to Llamasoft developing a Tempest game.
Yeah, it was, and I only glanced over much of Llamasoft's history. In 2004 and 2005, Jeff Minter published a series of columns covering the history of Llamasoft. These first appeared in the UK gaming site Way of the Rodent, and I subscribed to their RSS feed just so that I could get the next installment as soon as possible. It's a fantastic series, very entertaining and well written, and is available on the Llamasoft website, which will of course have a link waiting for you in the show notes. There's a lot of great stuff in there, and I enjoyed it immensely, so do check it out. Llamasoft was known for having games with, well, llamas, and lots of them, but such was his reverence for Toyer's design that he left them out of Tempest 2000. No llamas, no camels, no fluffy sheepies. Minter's goal was to keep the feel of Tempest intact, but expand on that in his own unique way, and for the most part, Atari was happy to give him free rein. His producer at Atari was John Scrutch, who, from what I've been able to find out researching this in past episodes, is a really stand-up guy, and one with whom Minter had worked in the past. Minter was flown to California to get a look at the Jaguar hardware and sent off with a prototype for development, and largely left alone. He was nudged a few times in certain directions to fill the vectors or tone down the pixel shatter in the bonus stages, but largely Minter could do what he pleased with the game. He added new enemies, ones which would force you to change your strategy just like the Pulsars did when they first appeared in the original. He also added power-ups and bonus levels and different designs for the webs. It was a balancing act, trying to be true to the source material while still adding significant elements to the game. Did he pull it off? We'll see.
Heyo, what is up, everybody? BTB from the Jag Bar. Hey, you know what I really like to do when I get home? I like to put my feet up, grab a nice cocktail, and listen to the soothing sounds of the Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast, hosted by the one and only Shinto. Shinto, take it away, my man. Cheers.
Minter had never done a 3D game before, so this was his first foray into the world of polygons, and this on top of learning how to program the Jaguar itself, which was new and experimental and a big step beyond anything currently on the market. It was the most complex machine on which he'd ever coded to that point, but he was still able to put together a simple working version before too long. As I said, he was asked to fill in the vectors and used Garo shading for that, a strength of the Jaguar and a technique I discussed in more detail in the Cybermorph episode of this podcast, episode 2. One of the signature effects in Tempest 2000 is pixel shatter, where bitmapped images seem to blow apart into individual pixels, like an orderly explosion. Minter did this with the Jaguar's TOM chip, writing to the screen with address generators. Even though that's not how it was designed to work, these address generators were supposed to be used for internal processing, something one of the hardware designers made a point to convey to Minter after the fact. Another distinctive graphic feature used in the game is a scaling, rotation, and distortion technique which Atari dubbed Meltovision. It's a trippy effect that was a bit too slow for actual regular gameplay, but it got used in certain screens, the title screen, game over screen, transitions, and one of the bonus levels. Music. The game needed music. Atari had a good working relationship with Magitech Design, a company which I covered in more detail in episode 5 of this podcast, the write-in episode, and the Magitech worked on the music for Tempest 2000. What Minter did was he made a video of himself playing the game, along with music to which he enjoyed playing the game, and sent that video off to a Magitech. They came back with a demo tape a few weeks later, and while Minter loved the music they came up with, he didn't think it would sound as good on the Jaguar, but sure enough it did. The music consists of 4-channel Pro Tracker-style modules, the same as Raiden, but if you remember the Raiden episode where I talk about mod files in more detail, I said that it's not the number of channels, but how you use them that counts, and in the hands of a skilled tracker musician, you can get some pretty complex arrangements. For example, one song may only have 4 simultaneous voices, but these Tempest 2000 songs have 9, 12, even 17 different samples per song. And one of these samples can be an entire drum line. For example, there's a lot going on in there, but that's just one sample, so it consumes just one track, one voice. You still have 3 others to go along with it. Samples could also include voices. Many of the Tempest 2000 songs made use of voice samples.
Play.
Ian Howe, Alistair Lindsay, Kevin Seville, and Julian Hodgson are credited as working on the Tempest 2000 soundtrack. The mod files are available on the Fading Twilight archive, and not only is all of the in-game music in that archive, but also mod files that were not included in the game. Why were they written but not included? My guess would be space constraints on the cartridge. Each song looks like it would take roughly 6 to 8% of the available ROM space, and the 7 songs that made it into the game therefore used about 42% of this 2 megabyte ROM. Maybe less depending on possible compression, but that's still a big chunk of the cartridge ROM. I looked at the sample names and internal titles of these tracks looking for any interesting pieces of text. In the list of sample names, sample 1 typically says Tempest Tune 7 or some other number, followed by copyright 1993 IDI for sample 2. All the other sample names are blank, with a couple minor exceptions. As far as the song names go, the titles, the game's theme song that I've been playing so far is called Weird. The first level set song is called Rave, the second bonus level song is called Regadalia, but most of them have names like Temp 6 and Temp 18 and Temp 22. Tempest 2000 won the Best Music Award at the 1994 Consumer Electronics Show, and was one of the first games to have its soundtrack released separately as an audio CD. That soundtrack, the CD, is also available at Fading Twilight as MP3 files, and I'll include links to both mod and MP3 soundtrack files in the show notes. Musician Alistair Lindsay had an email conversation with Wes Powell. Lindsay also worked on Dino Dudes, Bubsy, iWar, and Defender 2000, and I'll be revisiting that interview when we get to Defender. Tempest 2000 was Lindsay's first game, and as far as debuts go, it's not bad. In the interview, Lindsay talks about how the first level set contains the phrase, "Television is the retina of the mind's eye." I've isolated it for you here.
Television is the retina of the mind's eye.
This was originally sampled from a 1983 sci-fi horror movie called Videodrome, being something said by the character Professor Brian Oblivion. It's Irish, get it? Oblivion. Here's the entire context of the quote. "The battle for the mind of North America will be fought in the video arena, the Videodrome. The television screen is the retina of the mind's eye. Therefore, the television screen is part of the physical structure of the brain. Therefore, whatever appears on the television screen emerges as raw experience for those watching. Therefore, television is reality, and reality is less than television." Alistair Lindsay says that they originally sampled the movie, but then he re-recorded the quote to avoid copyright concerns. Now, you may notice that the voice is different in the mod files used in the game and in the soundtrack CD, so I don't know if he re-recorded the voice for the CD and the movie sample remained in the game, or if both were re-recorded. I thought about buying Videodrome to find out, but it seemed like chasing this tangent a bit too far. But if anybody out there happens to have Videodrome and can tell me if the voice sample I just played matches this Brian Oblivion character, please let me know and I'll update the show notes accordingly. The voice doesn't really look like it fits the actor, though. The Jaguar launch announcement in June of 1993 included Tempest 2000 among the titles in development, and this was shown at the Hand-On Press event in Sunnyvale 2 months later. Minter was in attendance at the media event held in New York City in November to build up the launch of the Jaguar. One of the hardware designers, after knocking back a few, reportedly told Minter that his game didn't really make good use of the hardware, and that Atari considered it kind of a filler title compared to the likes of Trevor McFur and the Crescent Galaxy. At the Winter Consumer Electronics Show in January of 1994, Tempest 2000 was awarded Game of the Show by Electronic Games Magazine and Best Jaguar Game of the Show by Electronic Gaming Monthly and GamePro. In April, the game was available to the public. The soundtrack CD was announced at the Summer Consumer Electronics Show in June of 1994, with a release in March the following year. Minter went on to create Defender 2000 for the Jaguar, and wrote the Virtual Light Machine for the Jaguar CD-ROM. The whole light synth side of Llamasoft, I'll save for the CD-ROM episode, which is episode 33. He also wrote Tempest 3000 for the new one, and continued with the tube shooter genre in Space Giraffe on the Xbox 360 and PC, and TXK on the Vita. These two I'll talk about in more detail later on. In addition to these tube shooters, Minter wrote games for the Pocket PC platform, and then later iOS and others. One more thing about the music. I love the music, and I'm going to include a lot of it in this episode, sourced from the mod files, both ones that made it into the game and the ones that did not. Astute listeners will recognize these extra songs from the soundtrack CD, and will be able to pick out all the minor differences. I listened to that CD so many times in the 90s that it was kind of a trip to hear these slightly different original mod files. What I try to do here in this podcast is limit musical interludes to be about a minute and a half long, and given how much music there is available for Tempest 2000, there will be a whole lot of these interludes scattered throughout this episode, starting now. This is usually the part of the podcast where I talk about the game's storyline. In Tempest 2000, there is no story. The manual covers a brief history of the arcade original, but that's it. This is such a pure, primal gaming experience that no backstory is necessary. You blast things to not die. That's all the story you need. There are 4 main modes in Tempest 2000, which I'll cover in menu order. Traditional Tempest is not an emulation or recreation of the arcade original. The web designs differ, there's music and a background star field, and by default, the web moves slightly to follow your motion. So what makes it traditional? The types of enemies and some of the graphics mimic the arcade game. For example, your projectiles look and sound different. Explosions are simpler and lack the pixel shatter effect, and the manual presents this mode as a good place to get started and get a feel for how to play the game. So it's like it's Halloween, and Tempest 2000 is wearing a Tempest arcade costume. Some superficial qualities look like the arcade, but you can definitely tell it's Tempest 2000 underneath. Take, for example, the transition between levels. Which grants you a Super Zapper recharge.
Super Zapper recharge.
That's the same in all game variations. It doesn't make it any less cool, just not like the arcade. Tempest Plus is sort of a transition between traditional and 2000 modes. The web vectors are not filled, there are no power-ups or enemies that do not appear in the arcade game or bonus rounds, but you do get some updated sounds, like the firing sound. The cool pixel shatter effects, updated claw, and enemy graphics which incorporate ground shading, and 3 distinct versions. The first is single-player, pretty straightforward. Second is single-player with an AI droid, where you always have a companion, a wireframe cube spinning above the web, moving around and blasting enemies. The third variation is a cooperative 2-player mode, where player 2 takes over a green claw to fight alongside your yellow claw, sharing the same score and set of lives. It's a cool idea and a nice addition. I've played this one a lot with my brother, then my friends, and now with my children.
Television is the retina of the mind's eye, mind's eye, mind's eye.
I'm going to take a quick sidebar here to talk about the enemies. The first ones you'll encounter are the flippers. These are initially red, sort of bow tie shaped critters that when they reach the rim they will flip over and try to pull you down. It's possible to shoot them when they're on the rim, but it's definitely best to take them out ahead of time. They can shoot projectiles, which you can destroy with your own. If they hit you, you lose a life. Flippers are good for 150 points. You'll encounter flipper tankers, which hold 2 flippers, breaking open when you hit it. If the tanker reaches the rim without being shot, then it'll dump its contents there instead. Tankers themselves are worth 100 points when shot. Spikers are little green spirals that create spikes in corridors at the base of the web. Their biggest danger is not from their projectiles, but from the spikes themselves, which will skewer you as you warp out of a level. So, just when you think you've beaten a stage, if you run into one of these spikes on your way out, you're not going anywhere. It'll cost you a life, and you'll have to replay the level. You can wear these spikes down, piece by piece, for 10 points a hit. The spikers, who create the stabby green mess at the base of the web in the first place, are worth 50 points. Fuseballs have long, multicolored tendrils, but aren't confined to corridors. They float around between them on their way up to you. Blast them before they reach you, and you'll get 250, 500, or 750 points. The point values seem to be randomly assigned. Once these guys reach the rim, they'll move toward you, corridor by corridor, and your only defense is the Super Zapper, AI droid, or by jumping over them, if these latter two are supported by the game variation that you're playing. There are also fuseball tankers, which carry 2 of these slippery buggers. Pulsars. You thought you could just scoot around the rim of the web with impunity, didn't you? Not when these yellow guys arrive after level 16. As they climb up a corridor toward you, they pulse. When they're flat, they're safe. When they expand up, they electrify that corridor. If you happen to be in it when they do, you'll get fried. The edge of the rim will flash when it's electrified, so you'll have to watch out and time your shots well. When they reach the rim, they'll flip their way towards you at flipper speed, at least in traditional and plus versions of this game. These guys are worth 200 points. There are pulsar tankers, too, which carry 2 of these frustrating foes. Like all the tankers, they'll give you 100 points when hit.
Is that all the enemies?
For now, Bishop. For now. Let's go and talk about the real attraction in this Jaguar game, which is 2000 mode. You're playing on a web with filled vectors, and the ground-shaded color cycling playfield gives 2000 a more solid feel. There are power-ups. Shooting an enemy may occasionally drop a power-up, which slides toward you in the same corridor the enemy last occupied. If you pick it up, you can receive one of the following goodies in this order. Particle laser, more powerful than your claw and more rapid too, going from this to this. And it's really good for taking out spikes, going from this to this. Zappo gives you 2,000 points. Jump enabled, this gives you the ability to leap up off of the rim of the web. Very handy for safely taking out enemies like fuse balls that have made it up to the top. Your hang time is about 1 second. The next power-up is Outstanding. It's worth 2,000 points. Followed by AI Droid. Like in the Tempest Plus variation, this indestructible wireframe cube will help take out enemies for you. It uses whatever firepower you are currently using. Next is the Warp Token. If you collect 3 of these, represented by colored triangles at the top of the screen, you'll warp to the bonus round at the end of the current level. They're cumulative. You can carry 1 or 2 bonus tokens with you until you get the 3rd, or lose all of your lives, whichever comes first. Collecting a warp token will tell you either 2 more for warp, 1 more for warp, or warp enabled, and you'll hear "Excellent." And it also includes a free instant super zapper, and recharges your super zapper if you've already used it, at least in a limited fashion where it can take out 1 enemy on screen. After the warp token is Zappo, that's 2,000 points, and then Dude, that's 2,000 points. One other power-up is called Outta Here. It's a rare power-up that ends the level and gives you 5,000 bonus points, but you do still have to watch out for spikes at the bottom of the web on your way out. If you happen to collect a power-up while you're in transition to the next level, you will get a yes, yes, yes.
Yes! 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 Yes!
This means that the first power-up you get in the next level will instantly give you an AI droid, rather than having to wait until the 5th power-up. It's very nice to have in the later levels. There are 3 different types of bonus rounds, and the one that you visit depends on which level you're on when you collect the 3rd token. The first one has you flying through rings, and is, well, let's start the music for this one. The first warp puts you in a round tube with glittering stars around the perimeter. In the middle of this tube runs a trippy, distorted river of either planet Jupiter-like clouds or bacon, depending on how hungry you are. I'm thinking it looks like bacon right now. You can be either above or below this weird, winding river, and you're flying through rings, earning 500 or 750 points each. Some of these rings contain a pair of blue chevrons, giving you a speed boost. And other rings have a yellow arrow, which pushes you up or down depending on the arrow direction. Miss a ring, and you're done. A few extra notes on this bonus level. If my count is correct, there are 48 rings total. Even though the voice might say boost multiple times in a row, you only actually see a speed boost when you pass through the blue chevrons, which seem to toggle between saying boost and yes. I can't tell if this is a bug or if it's intentional. Rings may be about 3.5 seconds apart.
Yes! Yes! Yes!
Or can get crazy fast.
Yes! 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 Yes!
Winner.
Yes! 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 Yes!
Going from one ring to the next may require minor adjustments earlier on, or bigger adjustments with wider gaps in later iterations. Which reminds me, if you hit this bonus level more than once in the same level set, it gets harder each time, even if you don't beat the previous bonus area. Make it all the way to the ring with a multicolored triangle at the end, and you'll net an additional 20,000 bonus points and warp ahead 5 levels. If you complete a bonus level, the screen shows excellent and 20,000 bonus in front of a color pulsing triangle, warp 5 levels at the bottom, and the whole thing is done in Meltovision. This is true for all 3 types of bonus levels. The second bonus series, cue the music, The second bonus series asks you as the sparkly white thing to stay on the green track as you proceed down a pixely tube. The track turns blue as you hit it, and takes up, roughly a quarter of the circumference of the tube, maybe a third. The longer you stay on the path, the longer your tail. If your tail is reduced to nothing, you're done. Make it all the way to the yellow ring at the end and you get your 20,000 bonus points and 5 level warp. It's harder than it sounds, or at least it is to me, since you carry some momentum that you sometimes need to cancel out, but don't cancel out too much momentum or you'll overshoot. Still, you can get a lot of points for staying on the green track. The third bonus type again requires flying through rings, with the music and rules similar to the first bonus, but the visuals are entirely different. There's no Jupiter River here, but instead a whole lot of Meltovision going on. You thought the first bonus round was trippy? This one is crazy. Yet awesome. Crazy awesome. It seems to have some light synth qualities here as the background pulses to the breaths of the first round bonus music, which is repeated here. You get a burst of color with each yes or boost as you move through the rings. Getting a 1-up here is especially weird as the 1-up graphic melts in with everything else. It's worth experiencing at least once in your lifetime. If you fail to complete a bonus round, you just move on to the next web as if nothing happened, except that you probably have more points and maybe another couple 1-ups to your name. So it's definitely worth your time to go for these warp tokens. Besides, you probably noticed based on the music, it's kind of mellow compared to the rest of the frantic blasting action. This is entirely intentional. Jeff Minter liked the dichotomy between frantic blasting and smooth and trippy flying. But 2000 mode isn't all just filled polygons and power-ups and bonus levels. No, that would be too easy. There are additional enemies here, devious, tricky enemies that will force you to adjust your playstyle. In addition to the enemies present in the other game variations, the pulsars are more dangerous here. They'll still electrify their corridor in pulses, but when they reach the rim, man, watch out. They split in two and move rapidly toward you. I'm not kidding, these guys are fast. There are also mutant flippers, like regular flippers, but angrier, faster, and more hostile. They're still only worth 150 points each. Demon heads. These giant horned heads stare at you as they climb up the web, and if you shoot them, which you should, you'll still need to dodge their indestructible horns, which will fly up towards you, even if you use the super zapper on them. This enemy takes multiple hits to defeat, especially without the particle laser. If these guys reach the rim intact, their size and speed makes them pretty tough to deal with, but you can kill them without jumping. The 150 points you earn doesn't seem enough. Next are mirrors. These things will climb the web and stop, blocking a corridor. Anything you shoot at them, they shoot right back at you, though their return fire does open them up briefly. But if you can get the fire and dodge timing right, maybe you'll be rewarded with 250, 500, or 750 points. And finally, there are UFOs. They're not stuck on the web, but hover above you, raining down lightning bolts. Your only option is to jump over the UFO and blast it from above. The same different point levels of 250, 500, and 750 apply to these guys too. 2000 mode also includes keys. Keys are based off of initials that you enter on the high score screen and let you resume a game from more or less where you left off, level-wise. Keys can be saved for any odd-numbered level you completed past 17, and the cartridge will hold up to 4 different keys. Did you make it up to level 51 before losing your last life? Well done. With the key, instead of starting back at the beginning next time you plug in the game, you can resume at 49, the last odd-numbered level completed. If you start a game of Tempest 2000 with a key, your subsequent high scores are automatically recorded, no need to re-enter your initials, and the key is updated with the latest level number completed. It's a way to sort of continue where you left off, and is something Minter has improved on in some of his more recent games. The last game mode in your Tempest 2000 Jaguar cartridge is called Duel, where there's one player at each end of the web trying to blast each other. But there's more to it than that. Each player's claw is equipped with a mirror, reflecting shots back unless you're firing, at which point the mirror disappears and you're vulnerable. There's also a generator halfway down the web sending out flippers, so you'll have to contend with that too. You can also have a cube floating around the web. You can't destroy the cube, but you can push it to the other end by shooting it. If it reaches the rim of your opponent's end of the web, it'll zap him. The playfield is presented as a pseudo-split screen. Not completely split, there can be some overlap, but the vantage point of each player is shown side by side. You can still adjust the viewing distance, as I'll cover shortly when I talk about the controls. There are 16 different levels you can choose from, differing both in shape and arrangement of obstacles. Some have no cubes, some have multiple cubes, some have few flippers, and some have lots of flippers. There's a solo practice mode where you'll learn to control the mirror and handle the complications of the playfield. You don't have an opponent, but every shot that reaches the other end of the web is reflected back, kind of like you're playing a flawless opponent. If you select Tempest Duel against another player, you can choose 1 round, best of 3, or best of 5. When you die and still have lives left, you get about 3 seconds of invulnerability. The first one to lose all their lives, represented by triangles at the top of the screen, loses. If you're playing more than 1 round, in between each round you'll see the number of wins for each player, a color cycling Meltovision triangle moving left and right, and press fire to play the next round at the bottom. If you wait, it'll move to the next round for you, which takes place in the next web in order. At the end, it'll say player 1 wins or player 2 wins, whichever one is probably not me. In all game variations except for Duel, you start the game with 3 lives in reserve. You seem to get an extra life, or 1-up, at the end of the first level and again every 20,000 points. If your starting level has a hefty bonus attached to it, you're not going to get a huge stack of extra lives when you collect that bonus, just 1. While there are no save keys for traditional and plus modes, if you get past level 16 and then die, you can resume from the last odd-numbered level you completed as long as you get back in immediately. Traditional and plus modes have 16 unique web designs, each constructed from between 8 and 18 corridors, with the level designs repeating in the same order for each level set. A level set consists of 16 levels. After a level set, your web designs recycle, but you get different music and different colors. The second set has red webs, the third set has yellow, the fourth set has invisible webs. Yeah, they're invisible in traditional and plus modes. Fifth is pink and uses the level music from the first set. Sixth is orange and has the same music from the second set. Seventh is white and has the same music as the third set. Eighth is red again, ninth is blue again, and now if you're doing the math in your head, you'll know that I've gone way over 100 levels. Traditional and plus modes do not end, at least not as far as I've been willing to check. However, if you're past the white levels, lose your last life, and get back in immediately to continue, you'll see that you can only continue from the equivalent of level 97. Even if you died on level 134, 97 is the latest starting point. By the way, your starting bonus at level 97 is over 2 million points. Tempest 2000 mode has 32 distinct web variations, 16 at a time. The webs follow the same colors as traditional and plus modes, except there's no invisibility web for the fourth set. Instead, these are unfilled cycling rainbow-colored vectors, and they look awesome. Add in the thrashy music, and this is perhaps my favorite set of levels. If you happen to complete all 100 levels of Tempest 2000, you'll unlock Beastly mode. What this does is give you the option to make the game harder, any game mode, traditional, plus, or 2000. You'll see a new option at the bottom of the screen during level select. It'll say, press option for Beastly mode, and if you hit option instead of the fire button, you'll enter the currently selected level, finding first that your normal shots are slower, going from this to this. Your shots travel slower too, but not the enemies. They're faster, more intelligent, more aggressive. But they're worth more points. How much more? The manual doesn't say, but I counted 80 to 90%, perhaps a bit more depending on the enemy. Not quite double. Taking out, for example, a fuse ball will still say 250, 500, or 750 points, but you'll actually receive more than that. You move your blaster, your claw, left or right around the web with the D-pad. Up and down on the D-pad are only really used for menu navigation, level select, and the first and third bonus rounds. By default, the A button jumps if you're playing in 2000 mode and have acquired the appropriate power-up. The B button shoots, and the C button unleashes your Super Zapper. Holding the B button has a degree of auto-fire. It'll shoot 8 times and then pause. You can, of course, tap the button to shoot faster, but as far as auto-fire goes, this one seems about right. Right, and excuse me.
That was thoroughly unconvincing.
What can you do? The pause button brings the intense action to a halt for as long as you want. Here are some things you can do while paused. If you press the A button, you can adjust the music volume by pressing the D-pad up or down. The volume level is represented by the size of the multicolored triangle used widely throughout the game. Similarly, the B button will let you adjust the sound effects. Also, while paused, if you press 1 or 3 on the keypad, you can hide the paused graphic, which is good for screenshots. The option button is only used on the main game screen to bring up the menu of the game options, which I'll cover a little bit later. The keypad can also be used to adjust your view of the web while in the game. If you hit 1, 4, or 7, the numbers along the left side of the keypad, you get the default web view, where it moves in relation to your position. If you hit 2, 5, or 8, the numbers along the center of the keypad, you lock the web view so it doesn't move at all. It's a little distant, but if you wanted a view like the arcade game, this is the one to use. It can also be helpful if you're in plus mode playing with 2 players. Having the other player move the web around you can be kind of distracting. And if you push one of the numbers along the right side of the keypad, 3, 6, or 9, you get a close-in view of the web, still moving in relation to your blaster position. It's cool to be up close and personal, but works better on smaller webs so that you can see more of it at one time. It's possible to pause the game, hit one of these numbers, and then when you unpause it'll switch to that view. Not terribly helpful, but just something I found mildly interesting. Along the bottom of the keypad, 0 will toggle the music on or off, and if you hit pound and star at the same time, it'll reset the game. If you hold down star, option, and pound from the title screen, you can restore the cartridge to factory defaults, wiping out high scores, keys, and volume settings. There was never an official overlay released for this game, though some fans have created their own. For example, Tony Price used to make overlays for Tempest 2000. I'm including a link to his old overlay page in the show notes. Since this page is only available courtesy of the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine, it's unlikely that he's still making these. Toward the end of Tempest 2000's active development, there was talk at Atari that maybe someday a rotary controller for the Jaguar could be made. Atari didn't really have the resources to develop such a controller at that time, but even if they didn't make one, someone else might. Jeff Minter, of course, being a big fan of the Tempest arcade game, knew how much his game would benefit from a rotary control, so he hacked up an Atari 2600 driving controller and wrote the code to hook it in. It only took him about 2 days to add this. However, the option to enable this mode was hidden because Atari didn't want to receive a bunch of calls asking when or where they could buy a rotary controller. If you want to enable this hidden menu option, plug in 2 controllers, and on the options screen hit the pause button on both controllers simultaneously. You will hear and see a new entry at the bottom of the options menu, controller type, which can be either joypad or rotary for either player. Once activated, this change is saved to your cartridge, so you don't have to activate it again unless you reset the cartridge with the star option pound thing. Wait, rotary controller? Then how do you navigate the menu or bonus rounds or level select? You can use a controller plugged into port 2 to navigate menus, though the rotary controller will also work on the menus. As for the bonus rounds, the rotary will still move you left or right, and the buttons A and C will move you up or down, respectively. It's cool that Minter put in this accommodation, but in the bonus levels I can't get very far, any of the bonus levels, but especially the ones where you're flying through rings. It just seems too sensitive to me. But it could be lack of experience. I've never played Tempest 2000 with a rotary controller before researching this episode. Nick Persane was kind enough to send me one of his rotary controller mods, and I've held off on trying it out before now. He has 3 different controller mod variations available for sale on his eBay store, each of which uses a high-grade black metal spinner. The simplest mod is currently listed for $55 and replaces the D-pad with the spinner, so that sort of makes it a controller dedicated to Tempest 2000, or the 2011 homebrew title Kobayashi Maru. Not a bad way to dedicate a controller, really. Note that the game Breakout 2000, another type of game that screams out for rotary controls, only supports the D-pad. The other 2 options Nick sells currently cost $60 and either mount the spinner below the D-pad or on the back of the controller. The switch on the bottom of the controller switches between D-pad and rotary. Mine is the back mount controller, so you hold the controller flipped over using the rotary control with your right hand and the buttons with your left. I guess you could play it face up and work the spinner with your left hand, but it would essentially reverse the motion of the claw. But I'm sure you could get used to it if you wanted to play it like this. It may sound weird to be hitting the buttons with your left hand on the underside of the controller, but putting a finger on each of these 3 buttons, it works, and it works well. I like this configuration because it comes closest to mimicking the arcade game, where you use the rotary knob with your right hand and buttons with your left. The knob doesn't have the same feel as the arcade, probably impossible due to the size constraints of the Jaguar controller. You can't fit in the arcade's massive encoder wheel in there, but the grippy metal wheel still gives you good control, and you can flip from one end of the web to the other in an instant. Nick uses new old stock controllers for his mods, so mine arrived in great condition and works perfectly as a regular Jaguar controller too. There have certainly been other people making modded rotary controllers for the Jaguar. Tyrant on Atari Age was making them for a while. Jonathan Askoff did as well, Chaos Reigns, but I can't find these for sale presently. Jeffrey Thompson, Jedi Jeff, I believe was his handle, used to make an optical rotary controller that I believe was very similar to the Tempest arcade game in feel. Dark Knight Games, maybe too. A lot of these I find mention of, but nothing current. I know I've seen rotary controllers on eBay other than Nick's in the recent past, but nothing on there right now as I record. If you know of any other rotary controllers currently on the market, please drop me a line, jaguar@gamebygamepodcast.com, and I'll include them in the show notes. When you boot up your Jaguar with Tempest properly inserted in the cartridge slot, you'll get the title screen. It says developed by Llamasoft at the top, and under that is a large, pulsing, stretching name, Tempest. Below that is the large number 2000, with copyright information at the bottom. Not only does the Tempest name flex and pulse, but leaves behind it a rotating, distorted, decaying version of the image that fades into the background of the entire screen. Atari called this effect meltovision, though Jeff Minter simply referred to it as shaded poly drawing and digital feedback. If you don't hit any buttons after about 25 seconds, the entire screen will freeze and meltovision itself over to the high score list, or Top Guns as it's known. It has the blue level 15 yak head web rotating and spinning in the background. You have the top 10 scores, the top one allowing both initials and several characters, and the other 9 showing initials for the scores and the level reached when that score was obtained. The default initials are all names of various beasties, very Llamasofty, with Beast at the top score, with the initials Yak. I read that he chose that handle largely because it fits in 3 initial high score entry, followed by Ewe, E-W-E, Cow, Gnu, Ox, Elk, Doe, Moo, Ba, and Fur. All the default level numbers are 1, and the scores range from 500,000, 17 points at the top, to 50,000 points at the bottom. After 16 seconds, the screen will melt away again. Next up in the attract mode are the credits, or Tempest Dudes as it's called. Original game design by Dave Toyer, Jaguar version by Yak, bitmap artwork by Joby, tunes by Magitech Design, game testing by Joe, Andrew, Hans, and Goku, voices by Ted and Kerry Takechi, produced by John Scrutch. In the background of the credits is a wobbly cylindrical star field, and a reverse pixel shatter image will drop in, pull towards you dramatically, and then start bouncing around, twisting, breaking apart, forming back together. The first image is, well, a yak head enclosed in a circle. After the credits, you get a bit of gameplay footage with the word demo at the top, and press fire to play at the bottom. After the demo gameplay, it goes back to the title screen. The second time through, the credits screen has the Atari Fuji symbol instead of the yak head, followed by gameplay footage from a different level. The third time through, the credits image is the logo of the artist Joby Wood, and one more piece of gameplay footage. The fourth time, it's Yak again, but with different gameplay. It'll continue in this pattern, Yak, Atari, Joby, Yak, but there are additional gameplay sequences. I counted at least 12, some actually repeating before others appeared the first time. So that's the attract screen, and it ticks all the boxes for what I think makes a good attract screen. But there's actually more to this game than just a top-notch attract mode, so hit a button, one of the red ones. You'll see a menu called Select Game Type to Play. In the background is a melting, distorting Atari Fuji symbol on a spectrum-colored, bumpy background. And at the top in a smaller font it says Press Option for Game Options. We'll do that first. The Game Options has the same stretchy Atari background. It says Game Options Select Dude at the top. Your options are Display Setup and Control Setup. Under Display Setup, which takes you to a different screen with a spinning, rotating yak's head web in the background, you can set the interlacing mode, either No Interlace, which is the default, or Interlace. Choose whichever looks best for your screen. I've tried this on an LCD with composite video inputs and on a CRT with S-video input, and both look best on No Interlace mode. The second display options entry lets you choose between fat vectors and skinny vectors. The spinning web in the background gives you a preview. Choose whichever you prefer. Exit is a third option and takes you back to the main menu, not the options menu. Control Setup is the other game option you can select and let you assign your preferred buttons to jump, fire, and super zapper functions. I prefer the default, A, B, and C in that order. Exit here again will take you back to the main menu. Now, if you're in the game options screen and press pause on both controllers at the same time, a new option, controller type, will magically appear. From inside here, you can set P1 or P2 to joypad or rotary by hitting a button over the selected controller. You can also exit out. From the main menu, Tempest 2000 is selected by default, but we're going to start at the top with Traditional. After selecting Traditional, you're given the option to start at a different level, receiving a starting bonus if you selected any but the first one. So you can start at level 1 with no bonus, level 3 with the 6,000 point bonus, level 5 with 13,600 points, 7 with 22,800 points, level 9 with 33,600 points, level 11 with 46,000 points, level 13 with 60,000 points, and finally level 15 with 75,600 points. This harkens back to the original arcade game, where you are asked to rate yourself and select a starting odd-numbered whole with an increasing bonus. But whereas you use the spinner to change the starting level in the arcade game, on the Jaguar you push up or down on the D-pad. Or if you're using a rotary controller, C to go forward and A to go back. You can also push the D-pad left or right to rotate the web horizontally. It's a little hidden feature. No way to do that with a rotary, sorry. But once you're done selecting the level and admiring the web, hit the B button and game on. Inside the game, you'll find your score in the top left corner, your number of extra lives below that represented as claws. 1 claw per life. The screen will show up to 8 claws, but it's possible to have more than that, they're just hidden. When you choose Tempest Plus from the main menu, you're given another menu, Select Options for this game, which lets you choose between 1-player, AI droid, or 2-player team. Once you select that, you move on to the same level select as in traditional mode. When you start Tempest 2000, if keys are available, you'll be given the option to just start or use a key. If you select Use a Key, you're presented with a new menu, Player Access Keys, and you're asked to choose yourself by selecting one of the possible keys below. It has initials and a level number. It's basically like a multi-user continue option. For Tempest Duel, you're given a Play or Practice menu, and your options are Tempest Duel or Solo Practice. Under Tempest Duel are your options for the number of rounds, 1, 3, or 5, and then you go to select the starting web, or only web if you're just doing a 1-round match. You can also exit from the Tempest Duel menu, and this option is only present here, not in the Tempest Plus menu or the Tempest 2000 menu with the keys. Kinda interesting, at least to me. There's a bit of hand-holding in the earlier levels, a very small bit, in the form of messages appearing on the screen. In Tempest 2000 mode, you're given the message Collect Power-Ups in dancing letters when a power-up is active. And in all 3 versions, in the early levels with spikers, it'll say Avoid the Spikes in those same dancing letters in the middle of the screen. I say dancing, they distort left and right using the same pixel shatter technique as used throughout the game. Kinda looks like dancing. There's one more interface I'd like to discuss before moving on, and that's the high score entry. You see this in 2000 mode, and only there's no high score entry in traditional or plus. And you only see the high score screen when you start without a key. Otherwise, your high score is automatically added to the table using the player's initials. It will say, "Congratulations, you got a high score," and in a smaller font, enter 3 initials, dude. At the bottom it says, "Use left and right to select letter. Press fire when letter is correct." You scroll through the alphabet with them fading in with a pixel shatter effect, all the while fireworks are going off in the background. Note that the initial screen does not have rotary controller support built in. If you have a rotary controller, you're not saving any high scores on the cartridge unless you started from an existing key. All you can do is reset the game. Maybe it's just me and my controller, That's the bad news. The good news is that even if you started without a key, you can still add one under the initials A ... on whichever level you left off.
Edit.
Sometime after originally publishing this episode, I was informed by a listener, and I don't remember who it was, sorry, that high score entry is possible when you're playing with a rotary controller by using a second regular controller plugged into port 2. I tried this out and sure enough it totally works. Set a high score, set down the rotary, pick up the second regular controller, and enter your initials as you normally would. The game assumes you own a second controller because without one, you wouldn't have been able to enable rotary support in the first place. Mr. Mentor, you're a genius. So I thought to myself, I wonder if the second regular controller could also be used in the bonus waves, where the rotary isn't that great to use, and you know what? It works there too. Now, granted, it didn't work well. I seemed to get some interference from controller 1, the rotary controller, but that may be because I dropped it on the floor in a panic to grab the second one to test out the bonus stage. This was my third trip to the Jupiter River bonus stage this play session, and when I thought to use controller 2, and these bonus stages are definitely less forgiving as you go along.
End of edit.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about the graphics and sound in Tempest 2000. First of all, the tune that I just played, that's the first of the mod files unused in the game. I've played all the stuff that made it in, so I'm continuing with the music that didn't. There are multiple fonts in use here. A tiny one that's mildly shaded and available in multiple colors. A medium one with a blue to purple gradients. You'll find that in the menus and on the dancing on-screen messages during the games. A larger fancy technical one for demo or paused or the high score entry. A different one for the score display on the screen with a yellow to blue gradient and orangish extrusion. I think that's it. Is that it? There are raster images for 1-up in Plus and 2000 modes, the word excellent, which you'll see at various times, and the point scores, 250, 500, and 750. Jeff Mentor never claimed to be a great graphical artist, but he teamed up with one here. Joby did a good job here. I've got to talk some more about pixel shatter, taking these fonts or bitmapped images and blowing them apart. Now, typically when you zoom in on an image past its natural resolution, it gets blurry or chunky, but what Mentor did here in Tempest 2000 was appear to break the image into its individual pixels, so that it can be essentially pulled apart, blasted into dozens of disparate pixels. It's a really cool effect. Lots of pixel shatter during a level can mask out some of the action, but it's a genuine element of the game. If you're in the zone, it won't bother you very much. I think it bothers people who are watching over your shoulder more. For the most part, things are exploding and pixel shattering all over the place, and you're still maintaining a good smooth frame rate. That's another thing, enemy explosions. Some explode in an expanding pinwheel of pixels, some in a sphere of pixels, some in a pixel shatter bitmap. Lots of pixels, lots of color, lots of movement. Speaking of movements, there's a star field in the background while you're playing. It's also there during level select and bonus level 1. The gameplay star fields follow patterns, a different pattern per level, and, well, I can't even count the number of possible star field patterns in the game. They move by quickly between levels and slow down like the Millennium Falcon coming out of hyperspace when you approach a new web, but a bit less streaky and more pixely. There's also some subtle color variations, like a spectrum spread out radially over 360 degrees. Some of the patterns are truly impressive, and the game would feel empty without them. The starfield changes with a bright flash between levels. As you move into the next level, the upcoming web will spin around 2 axes as it approaches, settling into its natural orientation as your claw lands on it. Your claw breaks apart into 4 unfilled vector pieces between levels and joins back together when it reaches the next one. The sound effects use a lot of variations in speed to mix things up. Here's an example. Same explosion, different speeds, different pitch. You get a whole cacophony of these playing as you blast the approaching enemies, and the variation keeps it from sounding repetitive. There is a cheat code in Tempest 2000. From the main menu, hold down 1, 4, and 7 on the keypad and hit A. You'll hear, and it'll activate whichever menu item you're on. This cheat code gives you 2 things. Inside a level, you can hit the option button to warp out of it. It's just like getting the Outta Here power-up, complete with the 5,000 points. But this also works on traditional and plus modes where the power-ups are absent. The other thing you can do with this cheat code is hit the 6 key inside a level, and that'll enable warping to the bonus level after the current web is complete. It'll say warp enabled in traditional and plus, but only actually works in 2000 mode.
Yes!
I'd just like to take a moment here to thank Jaguar developers for including cheat codes like these. I don't know what I would do without them. I certainly couldn't research games in such detail or isolate sound clips like I do without these codes. I can answer so many of my own questions without necessarily having the skills to play the game and reach certain points, so thank you. On Easter egg websites, this is commonly listed as an Easter egg in the first and third bonus levels. The background music has a sample of bleating sheep, but you don't hear it until about 3 minutes 10 seconds in, and the level just doesn't last that long. You have to pause the game and hit A to adjust the music volume and then just leave it. This is what it sounds like. Didn't quite catch that? It's subtle. Here, I isolated it for you. Some may say that this is Flossie, one of Jeff Minter's sheep at the time. He had 2 sheep, Flossie and Molly. Molly was bigger, but Flossie was prettier. Neither are in this sound clip. Magitech knew that Minter had pet sheep and included the sounds to his delight.
Pet sheep? That is kind of weird.
Well, I wouldn't say that, Bishop. I had a pet sheep at the time, too, named Elsie.
You are kind of weird too.
Well, that I'll grant you. There are some bugs in the game here, too. In the first bonus round, it is possible to get stuck below a certain threshold and not be able to reach rings above you. I've had this happen to me, and I've heard of others encountering it, too. Apparently, there's a bug if you pause the game at a certain time after completing a bonus level, locking up the game. Minter was sure he nailed that one about 6 times, but it still made it into the final ROM. The box for Tempest 2000 features some hand-drawn artwork, with the Bacon or Jupiter River, whatever, from the first bonus level flowing overhead through a cylinder of stars, and a series of rings going off into the background. At the top is the word Tempest in a font very similar to that of the original arcade game, with the number 2000 behind it. The box is dominated by a rather surly-looking red demon emerging out of the smoke monster from the TV show Lost inside a square made up of 56 corridors. Attacking the demon are 4 yellow claws. There's an icon indicating 1 or 2 players and a screenshot showing the player unleashing the Super Zapper on level 8. On the back of the box there are 4 more screenshots showing a triangle level, a Tempest duel on the Yakhead web, though if you look closely there doesn't seem to be an opponent on the right side, so this could be a practice mode. There's a picture of the first bonus zone, about to pass through a boost ring, and finally a screenshot just after collecting the Outta Here power-up on the red reverse Debian level. Some of you know what Debian is, and will get that reference. The text on the back of the box is headlined with "Feed your head to the web," and this is what it reads. Turn out the lights, turn up the volume, and prepare for a mind-blowing assault on the senses. Once your neurotransmitters get a taste of the hypnotic rhythms of 100% pure techno rave, you'll be hooked. Unable to escape the rush of blasting flippers and demon heads as enhanced 3D polygons, screaming particle displays, and hyperdelic melto-vision graphics warp you into the ultra-violent 64th dimension. There are some bullet points. Traditional Tempest, light up the webs in the arcade classic. Tempest Plus, team up with a friend or an AI droid in a totally upgraded version of the original. Tempest 2000, venture through 100 uncharted galactic webs filled with hostile targets, super power-ups, and bonus warps. Tempest Duel, go blaster to blaster against the most formidable alien of them all, your buddy. The cartridge uses a portion of the box artwork on the label. The manual is a 16-page stapled monochrome booklet with background images and a good amount of detail. Good job, Joe Sousa. Documentation writers don't get enough credit. It's an important job to do well, and I totally appreciate the extra effort. There was a TV commercial produced for Tempest 2000. It features gameplay footage with people superimposed here and there over the top, like black and white 1950s TV characters. I'm not terribly sure what they were trying to accomplish here. When TV commercials try to make their product seem awesome by juxtaposing it with the uptight characters of a 1950s sitcom, well, that's kind of a pet peeve of mine, especially when coupled with a melting film effect or a record scratch. I don't know why it bothers me, but it does. Anyway, here's the audio for the Tempest 2000 commercial.
Oh, Bob, look! What do I think? I don't know.
What's the use of even trying? You can't get a break.
New Tempest 2000.
What's that?
Only on the Jaguar 64-bit by Atari. Do the math.
The high scores for Tempest 2000 from the Atari H High Score Club have entries for both Standard and Beastly mode. The high score for Standard mode is held by Orpheus Walking, 2,127,340 points, set October 15th, 2010. For Beastly mode, that's 13,233,096 points, set by user The DVD on November 26th, 2009. My own high scores, I can't say. The ones that I have saved on my cartridge were the result of cheating, I'll admit that. Reviews of Tempest 2000 at the time were generally, well, glowing. Let's start with Edge magazine out of the UK this time. Reviewed in their May 1994 issue, Edge gives the game a score of 9 out of 10, calling it a brilliant overall package, maddeningly addictive, furiously fast, and amazingly playable. They say it's one of the best all-out blasters ever created. Moving across the pond, Electronic Gaming Monthly, in April 1994, published a review that awarded the game an Editor's Choice Gold rating. Out of 10, the 4 reviewers gave the game a score of 10, 9, 8, and 7. Ed Semrad, who awarded the score of 10, said that nothing done on any system to date even comes close to Tempest. 2 reviewers lament the lack of a rotary controller. The magazine maintained a list of the editor's top 10 games, and Tempest 2000 landed at number 10 this month, behind such games as NBA Jam, Samurai Showdown, Dracula X on the Turbo Duo, Pocky and Rocky 2, and Putt Putt Goes to the Moon for the 3DO. GamePro magazine, May 1994, gave Tempest 2000 the following scores out of 5. Graphics 4.5, Sound 5.0, Control 4.5, Fun Factor 5.0, and Challenge Adjustable. They say the game's stunning graphics and smooth gameplay make the Jaguar roar. For fans of the arcade game, they say there's no way you won't love this game. They praise the music, definitely a, quote, speaker tweaker, but hardcore fans will miss the paddle controller from the arcade game. Video Games magazine, 9 out of 10. Game Informer, 9 out of 10. Next Generation premiere issue, 4 out of 5, saying that Atari managed to create a fresh cart out of an old arcade game with its crisp 3D polygon graphics, a techno soundtrack, and a swarm of new enemies and obstacles. It's, quote, a must for everyone who owns a Jaguar game console. And finally, Die Hard Game Fan, March 1994, where Tempest 2000 was featured on the cover. The three reviewers gave the game 98%, 98%, and 96%, calling it an amazing overall package with color that just grabs your eyes the minute you fire it up. It's one of the few games on any system that you just have to own, and the world of gaming is just that much better because of its existence. In more modern times, the Atari Age external reviews have 9 reviews, ranging from 87% to 100%, with an average of 95%. On Moby Games, which has a combination of classic and modern reviews, the average is 88% across 25 reviews, with a high of 100%, 5 reviews coming in at 100%, 8 in the 90% range, 10 in the 80% range, and 2 at 67 and 68%. Atari Age gives Tempest 2000 a rarity of 3 out of 10. On eBay, loose cartridges are selling for around $20 to $25, complete with box around $30 to $40, and new in box around $50 to $60, but not many of those. Best Electronics has it listed new for $60, loose for $35. They also have the audio CD for $5. The Goat Store, currently $35 for a loose cart with a poor label, $40 for a poor label, poor box, but good instructions. B&C Computer Visions has it listed new for $150, soundtrack for $10. And finally, 8-Bit Fix is selling a back-mount rotary controller for $60, a like-new cartridge complete for $60, a like-new with X-Acto open factory shrink wrap for $65, and new with factory shrink wrap for $70. With the game as well received as Tempest 2000, it couldn't stay on the Jaguar, so I'm going to touch briefly on official and unofficial ports and follow-ups to the game. Atari launched a new division, Atari Interactive, in early 1996 to publish games for personal computers. The first title out was Tempest 2000, and it was also the only title out. Other announced games included Highlander, Baldi's, Flip Out, Missile Command 3D, and others, but none of these came to light. Magitech Design did the conversion to the PC for DOS and later Windows, and Logicware handled the Macintosh port. Llamasoft itself developed Tempest 3000 for the VM Labs Nuon. Some differences here include names for each level, webs that can change their shape, and shader-like effects before hardware shaders were a thing. There was a release for the Sega Saturn, and this one seems to be the closest console port to the Jaguar version. High Voltage Software handled this conversion, and you'll be hearing more about High Voltage in a later episode of this podcast. It uses music from the CD soundtrack. In In 1996, Interplay released Tempest X3 on the Sony PlayStation, said to provide improved speed, visual effects, and also changed just enough so that Minter wouldn't get royalties. In 2006, a developer named Thorsten Kupalt released a PC version of Tempest 2000 called Typhoon 2001. A Linux version was released too, a statically linked 32-bit binary. I tried this out on both platforms, Ubuntu Trusty and Windows 10, and both worked well. This game is really cool, and it has its own visual style, it replaced all the sound effects, but uses the mod music from the original. I really like it. It's kind of hard to track down a working link to download this game, but I've included Windows and Linux links in the show notes that worked for me. A clone of Tempest 2000 called Cyclone 2000 was developed by No Crew Mobile and is available from the Android App Store. It doesn't include but can automatically download the Tempest 2000 CD soundtrack, or you can swap in your own music. This version also supports Google Cardboard for a 3D experience, though I haven't personally tried that out. The Amiga had an unofficial port called Tempest 1200, the Mental Mix, by Mental Software, but I'm afraid I wasn't able to find any more information on this port. In 2007, Llamasoft released Space Giraffe for the Xbox 360, followed by a Windows version in 2008. It is similar to Tempest in many respects, but introduces a major change in gameplay where you can push enemies off of the rim. It's only possible to do so if you keep your power zone extended, which happens when you shoot enemies or use a pod, which is an enemy-dropped item. This game is filled with psychedelic effects, in part creating a sensory overload, which is an intentional part of the game's difficulty. The Windows version included an option to mostly turn off these effects, but personally, when I play Space Giraffe, it's the full-on psychedelic version. It was a polarizing game, but if it clicked for you, you probably loved it. The Atlantis Games Group developed a version of Tempest 2000 for the Atari 8-bit computer line called Tempest Extreme, released in 2009. It's an impressive version, great music, and is available on cart for $50 from Video 61. In February 2014, Llamasoft released TXK for the PlayStation Vita. This version was intended to be based on the original essence of Tempest 2000, a pure neon gaming experience optimized for the Vita's OLED screen. Llamasoft was working on subsequent versions for the PlayStation 4, including the Morpheus virtual reality system, with possible ports to the PC as well, but the company now known as Atari put the kibosh on that, saying that it was too close to their copyrighted works.
Space is everything.
Pleasure.
The Gaming History Source has put together a video comparing various versions of Tempest, including 2000 and its successors and derivatives. It's not very chronological for some reason, with Jaguar Tempest 2000 coming after DOS and Saturn versions. But it's a neat video. It includes Atari 2600 and 5200 prototypes, and I'll have a link to this in the show notes. It's kind of cool to see basically the same game represented on Atari's first home video game console, as well as its last. My first glimpse of Tempest 2000 was in a tiny screenshot in the March 1994 issue of Electronic Gaming Monthly. The picture is out of the first bonus round, but for the uninitiated, it's really hard to tell in that screenshot anything about the game. My brother and I were flipping through this magazine, and he told me, "Let's promise to never buy this game." I said, "Okay." Now, I knew Tempest vaguely. I played the arcade version once at a place called Boardwalk Arcade. They had a corner of the room that seemed largely dedicated to Atari cabinets. To the right of Tempest was the beautiful twin-stick vector game Black Widow. And over to the left were newer games like Vindicators, Zybots, APB, and Rolling Thunder. It was not yet the 90s, so it was not time for clacks. So while I did play and enjoy Tempest, to be honest, I was more taken by Black Widow. It was brutally difficult, but so pretty. And since the screenshot in the magazine looked absolutely nothing like the arcade game, I didn't make the connection between Tempest in the arcade and Tempest 2000 by name alone. I came home from work one day, and my brother was in my room. That's odd and a bit troubling. There was something on my TV. I had a 25-inch console TV. My rule back then was, if I fix it, I get to keep it. So I had about 4 TVs. 3 of these were black and white, but this 25-inch television was the biggest one in the house, besting the 19-inch TV in the living room. So I'm looking at the TV. There's lots of color on the screen, lots of blasting pixels, and music. There was some amazing music playing. My brother had bought Tempest 2000 at Babbage's that afternoon. I don't know what prompted him to pick it up, but from the moment I saw it in motion, I was captivated, absolutely enthralled by the color, the sounds, the music, the action. And when I picked up the controller, I was hooked immediately. Memories of Tempest in the arcade game came flooding back, but these were soon drowned in this beautiful wash of light and sound. Never before had I been so immediately taken in by a video game as I was with Tempest 2000, and if you've heard any of my many audio submissions to other Atari Game by Game podcasts, you'd know that I'd played a fair amount of video games in my life by that point. Growing up, my family used to order fireworks from a place in Illinois, items of questionable local legality. All of the packaging on these fireworks were beautiful explosions of color, and I would stare at these images leading up to the 4th of July, American Independence Day, the day where I'll let the Simpsons take over from here.
Celebrate the independence of your nation by blowing up a small part of it.
All right.
When we set off the fireworks, the result was never as grand or as impressive as the packaging would lead us to believe. Fast forward several years, and I've downloaded a PC demo called Unreal by a demo scene team from Finland called Future Crew. Part of this demo includes flying over a 3D landscape composed of disparate pixels, and that blew me away. I'll link to a YouTube video of this demo, but it's blurry and lossy and doesn't do the demo justice. But I would run the demo over and over just to watch that landscape section. It was such a cool effect. Tempest 2000 kind of combines both of those, the distinct colored pixels forming larger objects and the impressive, colorful explosions that the real-life fireworks didn't provide. That might be one reason why I was so taken with this game. We got as far as the rainbow levels, the 4th round of levels, but never very far into those. The music, though, I loved, and plugged my stereo in so that I could record the songs to cassette tape. I figured out that you could pause the game and hit the A button and just let the music play. I heard the sheep sounds in the first bonus level this way. I was into the Jaguar community quite a bit at this time. I was on an active email list, reading Usenet, rec.games.video.atari, and reading Atari Explorer Online as soon as those issues came out. This is how I learned more about Jeff Minter, the man behind Tempest 2000. I had to check out some of his other games. I downloaded shareware versions of Llamatron for DOS and Revenge of the Mutant Camels for the Atari ST. I really loved his style. He had a bizarre sense of humor and knew how to develop a balanced, interesting game. I followed the development of Defender 2000 through, I'll save that for the Defender 2000 episode. One of these Jaguar community sources led me to the mod files used in Tempest 2000. JaguSounds had those. And I'm not ashamed to admit that I used a lot of the samples from those files in my own music. I started to veer less metal and more techno in the songs that I wrote, and when the Tempest 2000 CD came out, I listened to that excessively. I was worried when researching this game, playing the game not to have fun, but to gather data for this episode, that I would burn out on it. If you analyze something too much, it's possible that it would no longer be as interesting as it once was, and I felt that was happening here, but toward the end of my research cycle, I was there playing the rainbow levels, my son was next to me, and I was having a great time, really getting into it, loving every minute. There are 2 TVs in the room where I have the video games, one little LCD monitor with TV inputs, and a 31-inch CRT that I've had since '97 or so, with audio running through my wife's old component stereo. It's a drastic difference playing Tempest 2000 on a little LCD TV with crummy speakers and on the big CRT with separate large amplified speakers. Same game, totally different experience. Given how much I loved Tempest 2000, I started following Jeff Minter's career after the Jaguar. I bought a new one because of the VLM and the promise of Tempest 3000, though I've never actually played T3K. I played his Pocket PC games, Gridrunner++ and Hoverbobber. Not on an actual Pocket PC device, though. We had one at work as our on-call phone, but I couldn't get the games to load there. But they played great on the PC. Gridrunner++ was fun, but I was especially taken by Hoverbobber, the lawn mowing game. Who would have thought that a game about mowing lawns would be fun? But this has a cheeky sense of humor, and to this day, when it's time for me to mow the real-life grass on my own property, I find myself humming the tune English Country Garden, and when I'm finished, I look at my fine work with the nice straight lines and say, "Tidy." I skipped out on the Xbox 360, but bought Space Giraffe and Gridrunner Revolution for the PC. They're cool games, and I've recently gotten them to work under Linux using Wine, so I might play them more if I can figure out how to transfer my registration from the oft-neglected Windows side of my computer. I love the song Flossie's Frolic in Space Giraffe. That's one of my favorite video game songs, and I'm pretty sure Jeff Minter wrote that one. Speaking of Flossie, when she passed away, Jeff Minter put a notification of this on his website, because we all knew Flossie, at least in some small way. His notification included a quote from a Dream Theater song. Dream Theater is my favorite band, so I was saddened about his loss, but he gained even more respect in my book for that Dream Theater reference. I don't own any iOS devices, so I've been left out of the Minotaur Project games, but they ported Gridrunner to Android, and it works well there. It's actually the only game I have installed on my Android phone. I think Llamasoft has ported some of the other Minotaur games to Android in beta form, but I haven't really tried those out yet. The game TXK made me wish I had a PlayStation Vita, but I already had a PSP and couldn't justify buying another handheld game system. I don't travel much for work anymore. But Llamasoft was working on updated versions of TXK for the PlayStation 4 and Morpheus virtual reality system. That sounded amazing, and I started to think about buying a PlayStation 4, but then the company now known as Atari put an end to that, and in a panic I bought TXK, even though I didn't have anything to play it on, because I was worried Atari would make them pull the game down from the PlayStation Network. But then I found the PlayStation TV for about $30 on Amazon and bought that. I played TXK briefly at home, and briefly again in a hotel room on the other side of the country. One thing I can say about the PlayStation TV is that it travels well. The game was cool and everything, but I didn't get immediately sucked into it like I did with Tempest 2000. But more recently, I plugged it into our large TV at home, cranked up the surround sound, and wow, just as with Tempest 2000 on the Jaguar, going from a crummy LCD with crummy speakers to a good TV with great speakers, it's a revelation. I still prefer the pixel shatter effects on the Jaguar over the neon effects on TXK, but it's a beautiful game. It looks great on a 55-inch TV, and with a proper sound system, it's a great time. Well worth the $30 for the PS TV alone. Well, that's my Llamasoft history. I guess you could call me a Llamasofty. But while I've been lurking on yakyak.org, the fluffiest forum on the net, pretty much since the site launched, I've never posted anything there, but call me a fan, and that started with Tempest 2000. So how would I rate the game, though? Let's go over the scale, the No Swear Gamer scale, once again. A rating of Hall of Fame is reserved for the top 5 games on the Jaguar. A solid rating is for games that are good, but not the elite. A meh rating is for games that are okay, but don't really grab you. And a trash rating is for the bottom 5 games on the Jaguar. Let's break it down. What do I like about Tempest 2000? Well, I've got to start with the pixel shatter, the smooth graphics and movement, the power-ups, the music, the sound effects, the variety, the warp zones, the starfield backgrounds, the frantic pace, the colors, the pure visceral gameplay experience. What do I not like? Well, I think it would have been nice to have some indication of which level you're on, a level number display on the screen. The rotary control isn't as instantly awesome as I had hoped. It took some getting used to, and I'm terrible at the bonus levels with it.
Is that it?
Yeah, Bishop, I think that's it. I haven't played the Saturn or PlayStation versions of the game, so I can't speak to those, and while I've tried out Cyclone 2000 on Android, and it's a perfectly competent clone, it just seems to lack the character, the soul of Tempest 2000 on the Jaguar.
Ha ha, computer software doesn't have a soul. If it did, then we podcast robot voices might think twice about our plan to overthrow humanity.
I'm sorry, overthrow what now? I just got email. I wasn't listening.
Nothing.
Alright, so about my rating, I'm going to give Tempest 2000 a Hall of Fame rating. It's not just my favorite game on the Jaguar, it's my favorite game. Ever. But that's my opinion. What do you have to say? On Facebook, I posted a picture of the 2-page magazine ad that ran for Tempest 2000. I spent way too much time stitching it together to form one seamless image, but that's my own personal problem. I asked you what you thought about the game, and here's what you said. Christian of the Atari Lynx Game by Game podcast says, Hall of Fame! Let's be honest here, even if you don't like the game and aren't crazy for it, it's in the top 5 games on the Jaguar hands down. With simple, straightforward concepts in both gameplay and graphical department, I think one of the game's biggest appeals is its massive depth of color. Things just really pop on this game for sure. It would be a crime for me to not mention the music, which is by far my favorite part of the game. If you've never listened to the soundtrack, do yourself a favor and hit YouTube. Like I said, even if you aren't crazy for it, it's got to be one of the best 5 on the system. Can't argue with that. By this point in the episode, though, you've heard the soundtrack, almost all of it, plus tunes that didn't make it in. Thank you, Christian. Gerald says, Hall of Fame for sure. One of the best games of all time and my personal second favorite game after Snatcher. I'm convinced that the Jag would have done much better if this was the pack-in game. Amazing music, killer graphics, and really just an old-school update done very right. As far as controls, they are stellar and made even better with the rotary controller code. Yes, thank you, Gerald. If there's another old-school update done this well, I'd love to hear about it. Bill Kendrick from the Atari XEGS podcast says, Hall of Fame, possibly across every system I own. Willie, benevolent leader of a vast podcast empire, says, Temptastic. It's off the scale. Nothing like T2K and my bottle of absinthe to spin the night away. Thank you, Willie. I've got another post from Willie, so stay tuned for that. Keith says, I never had a Jaguar, but had T2K on the PC and loved it. It was an A+ title for its day. The TXK sequel on Vita that was summarily cease and desisted by Atari is also excellent. Thank you, Keith. The PC version had a free demo that you could download, and I did that back when it came out of curiosity. Magitech did a good job with the conversion. It's not the same, but I think if you loved it on the PC, then you'd love it on the Jaguar. TXK is excellent, and it's definitely still available for purchase from the PlayStation Network. If you have a Vita or a PlayStation TV, I do highly recommend it. BTB from the Jaguar, a YouTube series where he plays Jaguar games with various guests, including SoCal Mike on a recent episode. He posted his Tempest 2000 episode, as well as an episode covering the rotary controller, one of Nick Brisane's controllers, and I'll include a link to both of these in the show notes. Of Tempest 2000, he says the best, so I'm going to put you down for Hall of Fame for that one, BTB. Bjorn says, clearly a Hall of Fame one. I still enjoy this game with a rotary controller I bought at eJagFest 2 years ago. It's just great and action-loaded arcade-style fun. One of my all-time favorites, I prefer it over all other existing versions. I couldn't agree more, Bjorn. Thank you for posting. Erytheus says, Hall of Fame for sure. It is a landmark on the Jaguar library, and I did not like it very much during the 90s. I rediscovered it in the early 2000s, and now I love it. The game is fun, especially in the duel mode, which I do not understand why Jeff Minter forgot it in his sequels and homages. The music is fantastic and the sound effects are amazing. I wish I could get all homages made to this game. I got the Tempest X on PS1, Tempest 3000 on Nuon. I also got Space Giraffe on the same day I bought my Xbox 360. I still need to get a PS Vita almost only for TXK. There was also a reply to this post by Bjorn saying, I remember you conducting a Tempest duel competition at eJagFest some years ago. Yes, yes, yes. And Arithius confirms, yes, exactly, and I won. I was the European Tempest champion. I'm a little jealous, guys. I haven't had the ability to play duel mode very much. When my friends and I tried it, they found it too confusing and wouldn't play more than one round before going back to the regular game. It's the part of Tempest 2000 that I've played the least, but thank you, Arithius, for your post. The PlayStation TV is a pretty good way to play TXK as well, though I imagine you missed something without the deep contrast on the Vita's OLED screen. And finally, for this thread on Facebook, Hugh said, this is the only Jaguar game I ever heard the other kids talk about positively when I was in middle school. I never played the game back then, but thinking about how cool it looked in the magazines was much more interesting than the typing drills in my 7th grade computer class. Thanks, Hugh. The thing about this game is that the pictures in the magazines can't really do it justice, and I don't know if you ever caught the TV commercial back then. I sure didn't, but I'm not sure that it does it justice either. It's the type of game that you have to see or especially play to really appreciate. Or not. Some people just don't like this style of game. UK Mike from the Retro Gaming Roundup podcast doesn't like Tempest-style games in general, and that's okay. I was out of high school when this game came out, so that's an interesting perspective, hearing other kids talk about it. As promised, here's more from Willie. He said, Tempest 2000 is my go-to game on the Atari Jaguar. I absolutely love this game so much I made my own custom rotary controller for it to give it more of that Tempest feel. Modded a Jaguar controller with a select switch for D-pad or rotary, also modded a broken Sega Genesis controller to have rotary dial on it, and make use of all 3 fire buttons to play T2K on the Jag. My favorite way to play this game is to run it through a projector on my living room wall, turn out the lights, have a couple shots of Absente, and slip away into the Itopia that is T2K. This is the only game I kept from my original Jaguar collection from when I purchased my system new, and then sold later, then bought another. Yes, the madness of selling stuff and then wishing you had not. T2K is here to stay in my Jaguar collection. I am such a Tempest fanatic. I have Tempest 3000 on the new one, TXK on my Vita, Tempest X on my PS1, and T2K on my Saturn. Yeah, Willie has a problem. Hello, Tempest Addicts Anonymous? Keep up the great work. We miss getting your audio subs over at the 5200 Super Podcast. Thanks, Willie. Tempest 2000 on a projector. I've never tried that. I have a projector. It used to be our TV back when 42-inch flat screens were dreadfully expensive. I don't have a good projection surface, though. Nothing bigger than the regularly sized TV. Still, I may have to check that out sometime. I've seen your Genesis rotary controller mod. That's pretty cool. And as for the 5200 Super Podcast, I just didn't have any good stories for the games that you've covered recently. I did try to record something for River Raid, but that wasn't any good, so I deleted it. On Twitter, Recta Pete says, best game on the system by far. The soundtrack was great. I still have my Jeff Minter signed CD I won during a Genie Roundtable, Hall of Fame. Thank you, Pete. That's pretty cool about the CD. Over on Atari Age, doctorclu had this to say. I believe Tempest 2000 is the 3rd game I owned. To some Jaguar owners for years, it was the reason to get the Atari Jaguar. Picked up the Jaguar with Cybermorph, then Bubsy, and then I believe I bought a Jaguar with Tempest 2000 as part of a deal. The game is naturally awesome. On a family-friendly level, this is one of the first games that my friends' kids that I used to hang out with ever gave a try. They were overwhelmed by Ghosts and Goblins on the NES, scared by Doom on the PC, and though they enjoyed watching me play Bubsy, they would start crying if I handed them the controller to play. But they loved to play the 2-player game in Tempest 2000, where both played on the screen at the same time. Now these kids live in network games, and it all started with the Jaguar, which they still have at their place. Now on a more adultish level, I will admit that I really enjoyed the warp level. I used to work to get to the warp as quick as I could. Nothing like hearing the female voice say yes, yes, yes. Then I would fall out of warp with a misstep, and then it was back to reality and business as usual. I remember feeling a bit let down when that happened. The soundtrack was as equally good as the game. At one point I got a hold of the mod files and used warp level music for good dungeon crawl music in a NetHack game I had on my Newton 2000. Just a simple game and a mod player looping that song, and it improved the mood gameplay tremendously. Overall, I think Tempest 2000, in its execution and smooth use of resources, is one of the timeless games on the Atari Jaguar. And what really impressed me was how rotary controller code was built into the game, and Atari didn't even have a rotary controller for the Jaguar. It was like the game was designed with the future in mind. Oh yeah, NetHack. I had just started working the swing shift at a company in 2004, doing production operations, and was usually really bored late at night, the only one in the whole office. Everything was stable, so I had absolutely nothing to do, so I started playing NetHack. It's remarkable how deep a gameplay experience you can have with just a screen full of ASCII characters. Anyway, Tempest 2000, you're right, the gameplay is such that anyone can pick it up without much explanation, and any game that gives you a 2-player cooperative option is a winner in my book. Thanks, Doc. We're coming up on one of your favorite games here pretty soon. I'll be in touch. Hey, Bishop. Do we have any text or audio submissions for Tempest 2000?
We do. 3 text and 1 audio submission.
Cool, please cue them up.
Ready.
Let's see, our first text submission is from Trooper Galactus on Atari Age. He writes, the iconic T2K, almost unanimously considered the one true must-have game for the Jaguar. It probably best exemplifies the true potential and possibilities for the system when games were well developed. It was a perfect combination of classic gameplay, modern graphics and sound, and new twists on an old theme. If Atari had more games as well hashed out as this, the Jaguar might have had a better fate. First off, the music is phenomenal, other than the opening theme song reminding me a bit of My Sharona. The beats are clear, up-tempo, and engaging. The music fits well with the overall theme of the game also. Beyond that, the sound is very solid overall, with clear shooting sounds, nice explosions, and a voiceover that isn't garbled. A hard feat to pull off back then. As for the game itself, while I was never a huge fan of the original Tempest, it was always a nice quick diversion, and T2K kicked it up a notch with added gameplay elements which made it relevant to the modern gaming scene while still pleasing to old-school adherents. There is a difficulty to the game which adds to replay value, and multiplayer enhances the experience further. The only thing that might have improved it further would have been maybe an 8-player versus mode of some sort, utilizing 2 multi-taps or the JAG link, but that probably would have been too much to ask of a game that was already pushing the limit. Overall, this is the best of the best, 10 out of 10, as good as it gets on the system and one of the best offerings of its era period. While it has seen subsequent release on the PlayStation in later years, for the Jaguar version it was the right game at the right time, just perhaps in the wrong place. I would not be shocked to learn this game's legacy was the only reason anybody bought a new one, so that they could play Tempest 3K. But that's another story. Wow, 8-player mode. Not sure how well that would have worked. My friends had trouble with dual as it is, but a 2-player dual over the JAG length, that's a good point. I didn't think about that. I imagine it would have worked well, but bigger objects and a clearer view of the web. You're right, Atari really could have used a lot more games like this, but I'm not sure how many developers had the programming chops and the well-honed game design instincts to pull off titles like this on the Jaguar, and would have worked for what Atari was able to pay. I don't know. More games like this could have had a big impact on the Jaguar's fortunes, but I guess we'll never know. Hey, good to hear from you, Trooper. I'm glad you wrote in. Our next email is from Lewis. He wrote, Hi, Shinto. I hope I'm not too late with this Tempest 2000 feedback. I love this game. It's such a great update to the original Tempest and one of the best reasons to get a Jaguar. Before getting the Jag, I had my trusty Saturn copy. Even though the frame rate was higher, it seemed less responsive somehow. It was also missing one of the bonus stages. And the thing that annoyed me the very most, the audio mix was way off. If I remember right, it was the gun sound that was much louder than everything else. Sure, you could turn it down, but that would turn all the sounds down. And what's Tempest 2000 without that Super Zapper recharge and the yes, yes, yes voices? Anyway, T2K is still a fantastic game today. It's the game that I'm usually playing on Jag when I'm not playing Super Burnout. It was also one of the only times in the 90s that Atari seemed tuned into current pop culture, as T2K hit right in the middle of the techno-rave breakbeat boom. Though I'm sure much of that was Jeff Minter's doing. I also have to bring up the rather nice DOS port. If you ever wanted to hear how the Tempest 2000 tunes would sound on vintage Roland gear or on Yamaha FM chips, this is the place to go. Thank you, Lewis. I'm glad you sent in your perspective on the Saturn version. All I've seen of it are videos on YouTube. It looks pretty close to the Jaguar version, Melto Vision a bit slower, other motion a bit faster, but it doesn't seem to use Garage shading on the web, and the star field doesn't look quite as cool. That's a shame about the voice samples being muted. That's a big part of the game. I know it uses the CD soundtrack, which in many respects is superior to the mod music in the Jaguar version, but to me it feels wrong. With mod files, you can put in an instruction to jump to a different part of the song, a loop, so that the song never actually ends. Plus, you can have an intro that's never repeated. So, for example, with The Mind's Eye, at the end of pattern 24, it loops back to pattern 6 and continues on like that. On the Saturn version, and PlayStation version for that matter, I assume, the song ends and then starts playing again from the beginning, maybe with a brief pause in between. That seems wrong to me. Maybe that's why I can't get into Cyclone 2000 on Android, which can also use the CD soundtrack. The FM synthesis on the DOS port is interesting. I wonder why they didn't just do the mod music there. Maybe they couldn't maintain the frame rate and level of effects with the mod music playing? I don't know. I've captured a few small clips of the music from off my old Pentium computer, kind of a medley, which I'll include right here. Thanks again for your submission, Lewis. Bill Kendrick, co-host of the Atari XEGS podcast and regular on the Antic Atari 8-Bit podcast, wrote in as well. He says, "Hey Shinto, is Bill from the XEGS podcast, Antic, etc. Hoping it's not too late to send in this short submission for your Tempest episode. First off, Tempest 2000. Wow. I forget where I first saw pictures of it, whether it's some GIF I downloaded online, Usenet binary group or FTP site or something, or in a commercial or what. But wow, I knew it'd be great. I enjoyed Tempest at the local Chuck E. Cheese's when I was a kid, though being a kid, I stunk at it. Fast forward a few years, in 1999 or so, I finally buy myself not one, but two Jaguars, $30 a piece back then. And of course, T2K was among the first games I got, beginning my small, now shrinking collection of Jag games. It lived up to the hype. I ended up shelling out $70, yes, over 2 times what I paid for the Jaguar, for a homebrew rotary controller, and that took it to the next level. If you don't have one, get one. Tempest 2000 is 10 out of 10, Hall of Fame, a 5-Ferg game. While I admit I haven't actually played it recently, it is the main reason I still got a Jaguar, and ranks among the best games of all 700 or so games I have across my various consoles and computers. Yes, that count includes individual games in collection discs and carts. Now here's the point where I, as a lifelong Atari 8-bit computer fan, have to make sure Tempest Extreme by Atlantis Games Group gets mentioned in your T2K episode. It was released in 2009 and is available on cart from Video 61. Sal K.J. Man Escoval directed the project and did some incredible covers of Imagitech Design's tunes, as well as sampling the digitized speech from T2K. Peter Meyer did the programming, and while not an identical clone of T2K, he did a great job at reproducing the franticness of Tempest and T2K with bonus items, an AI droid, and warp screens. Over on the Antic Atari 8-Bit podcast, I did a brief review of Tempest Extreme in episode 26. In interview episode 17, Randy interviewed Sal. Interview episode 110 is a chat with Peter. Well, that's it. Enjoy. Is it downhill from here or what? Thanks, Bill. I listened to your review of Tempest Extreme when that episode came out, and I've been meaning to thank you for the little shout-out you gave me there. I listened to the Sal interview a while back also. He said something in the interview, if I remember correctly, about having the cartridge so jam-packed that there was no room for Atari 2600 driving controller support. It hadn't occurred to me before that point, but yeah, the driving controller would have been awesome. I downloaded an old demo of the game a while back. It's improved a lot since then, but still, I was really impressed with the earlier version. I haven't checked out the interview with Peter. Those interview episodes started coming out faster than I could listen to them, and I've got quite a backlog. They're all really interesting, though. Downhill from here, maybe. There are a lot of great games coming up. I've only handed out 2 of my 5 Hall of Fame ratings, so there is more greatness to come. Nothing quite like Tempest 2000, though. It's certainly the peak, but the Jaguar Mountain is wider than some might think. Our audio submission is from friend of the show, the Requiem. He's sent in a lot of great text submissions, but this is the first audio one. Pretty exciting, so let's listen to that now.
Yo, Shinto, it's the Requiem from SegaNerds.com. Considering that Tempest 2000 is the game you're covering this week, I thought I'd honor such a great game with an audio submission, you lucky devil. Whenever people talk about their Desert Island game, the answer for me has been really easy for years. I don't know if I could ever get tired of playing Tempest 2000. Even when I'm playing other games, there's a part of me, a little voice in my head that says,
Wouldn't you rather be playing Tempest 2000?
have you ever seen the Stanley Kubrick movie Dr. Strangelove? It's kind of like the Doctor himself, the one who can't seem to completely control the brainwashed fascist in him.
That's because Tempest 2000 is the best! It's the best!
Shut up! Shut up! Sorry about that, Shinto. Like I said, Tempest 2000 Requiem sneaks out from time to time, but he's exactly right. I do love Tempest 2000, the presentation, the tried and true arcade design, and of course the amazing soundtrack.
Oh, God! Stop talking and play Tempest right now! Jeff Minter is a god! He's a god!
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
Oh, shut up! Oh, you're mad at me!
Shut the up! Shut up! Whew. Sorry about that. And where was I? Anyway, I really think it's undeniable how influential Tempest 2000 really was. More modern revamps of classic games like Pac-Man Championship Edition and Galactic Legions borrow a lot from Tempest 2000. And I wouldn't be surprised if Rez on the Sega Dreamcast wasn't at least partially inspired by the look and feel of Tempest 2000. It's kind of sad that modern Atari and Jeff Minter are so at odds these days. I haven't played Jeff Minter's Tempest 2000 follow-up TXK, but I have played both Space Giraffe on my 360 and even Tempest 3000 on my brother's Nuon. Really, though, nothing quite captures the greatness of the Jaguar original. I currently don't own a Jaguar, so I had to get my Tempest 2000 fix on my Saturn. It's a slightly inferior port due to longer load times and poorly balanced audio, but it serves its purpose to keep my Tempest 2000 appetite at bay. I think it's fair to say that if you put Tempest 2000 up against the No Swear Gamer scale, it's pretty easily a Hall of Fame game for me.
Hall of Fame! You can't handle the Hall of Fame! Tempest 2000 is the Hall of Fame!
Get out of here!
No!
Shut up!
Tempest 2000 is...
Shut up!
Tempest!
Shut up! Shut up! Get out! Shut up! Get out! Shut up! Get out of here! Oh, shut the up!
Alrighty, shut up!
Oh! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Stay down! Shut up! Shut up! Sorry again. This was the Requiem from SegaNerds.com. Love the podcast, Shinto. Keep up the great work.
Oh, man. I'm curious, Requiem. Have you tried speaking nicely to that voice inside your head? You know, it does make a valid point, and probably after listening to this episode full of Tempest 2000 sounds and music and stories, it might be the one beating you up. Might even take your lunch money and use it to buy an Atari Jaguar console and copy of the game. You mentioned Pac-Man Championship Edition and Galactic Legions, and I'm glad you did. There are so many examples of retro game remakes done wrong, and these two Namco updates do the opposite. They're good games, a fresh look, added modes and abilities, but with the same soul. They're also both more frantic and entertaining, like Tempest 2000. Perhaps that's a key ingredient needed for a solid remake. I've never played Rez. I don't know if it's inspired by Tempest 2000 at all, but I do know that a PlayStation 1 game called N2O Nitrous Oxide was in part inspired by T2K. Guy who worked on that, got his name here, Tony Crowther. He's an old friend of Minter's from the Commodore days and confirmed the link. I haven't played that one either, but from the video I watched, yeah, I could see the connection. There's kind of a spiritual successor to Rez that I've played briefly. It's called Child of Eden. I have that for the PlayStation 3. Not a whole lot like Tempest, but it does go for the whole multi-sensory experience thing, like what I've heard of Rez and kind of like Space Giraffe. What else? You're right, the modern-day Atari would benefit a lot from a partnership with Jeff Minter to, rebrand TXK as an official Tempest game to get it on the PC and modern consoles and Oculus Rift and whatever. To partner someone who has the programming skills, the game design experience, and the love of the original IP would be a huge win for Atari, but instead they wanted to throw lawyers at him, and that's a shame. Hey, thanks for your audio submission, Requiem. It's good to hear from you, and I hope that you can make peace with your alter ego. And if not, try some tea tree oil on your knuckles. It'll help them heal faster. That's going to do it for this episode. I'd like to thank everyone who took the time to send in their stories and thoughts about Tempest 2000. Coming up next episode is the one-on-one fighting game Kasume Ninja, followed by Bubsy in Fractured Furry Tales, Iron Soldier, and Wolfenstein 3D. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these games or anything I've covered previously, so please send in text or audio to jaguar@gamebygamepodcast.com. All show information can be found on the web, that's the World Wide Web this time, jaguar.gamebygamepodcast.com. Not everything fit into this episode's narrative, so I've broken out some tidbits in the optional storytime segment coming up after the music. But whenever you hit the stop button on this episode, please remember that there is a lot of good to be found out there in this world of ours, even with widely ridiculed video game consoles. So do try to keep an open mind and a joyful heart. Thank you for listening.
And now, story time with Shinto.
I was still living at home, commuting to my university when I first got the Jaguar CD, which I did as close to launch as possible. My mom questioned how I was spending my hard-earned money, and when she saw the Tempest 2000 audio CD, she asked me to play it, to put it in the living room stereo right then and play the disc. I had bought many CDs, but she'd never wanted to listen to any of those before, so I reluctantly dropped it in and it started to play. I totally didn't recognize the first track. I expected the level 1 music to start, but she asked me to turn it off before we got there halfway through the first song. She said something like the music would get your blood pumping, which is kind of the point, and to this day I don't understand why she asked to listen to the CD. Away from her judging ears, I listened to this disc all the way through and was actually disappointed with the song Ultra Yak on the CD. It seemed to lack the punch of the in-game thrash metal track, but I was pleasantly surprised by the last track on the disc, 2000 Dub, which starts out as the second bonus level but takes on a whole new personality after a few minutes. For several years, I had a command in my computer's autoexec.bat file to play a portion of this song when the computer booted up, and here it is. We're well past the age of autoexec.bat, but I might have to start using that sound clip again on boot. In 1995, I bought my first new car, a Saturn SL. I couldn't afford any of the fancy features like power steering, but was still quite proud of my new car. I sent out an email to the Atari Jaguar mailing list I was on talking about how I had just bought a Saturn and how it was a much more sensible purchase than the Jaguar. Yes, I was talking about cars under the guise of talking about video game consoles. I'm so clever.
Sarcasm detected.
Yeah, thanks for that, Bishop.
Sarcasm detected.
Bishop, disable sarcasm detector.
Fine. I really enjoyed helping you detect sarcasm.
Sorry about that. Where was I? Oh, in addition to power steering, I couldn't afford a built-in CD player, so I used a tape adapter plugged into an off-brand Discman that I kept on top of the dashboard. My job at the time was delivering pizzas, and I remember one particular run. I was driving down the road with the window open, playing the Tempest 2000 soundtrack. I did say I listened to it a lot. Mind's Eye was the current track, and a couple of guys my age pointed and laughed as I drove by. I guess the Tempest 2000 soundtrack is great for video games, not so cool as heard through the open windows of a brand new Saturn. One more quick story about the soundtrack. My friends and I were on a little road trip in my buddy Fred's 1986 or so hand-me-down Pontiac Bonneville. Riani, sitting in the back seat, asked if we had any video game music we could listen to. He was in a video game music sort of mood. And I, riding shotgun with my multiple volumes of CDs in the footwell, loaded up the Tempest 2000 soundtrack on shuffle. The Bonneville didn't have a CD player either. It was another tape adapter situation. The first track to come up was Glide Control from the first bonus level. And the Bonneville's terrible speakers totally butchered the breath sound, made it sound like an asthmatic robot with bronchitis, and my fellow travelers insisted I turn it off immediately. I had to switch to the Killer Instinct soundtrack instead. So I guess the Tempest 2000 soundtrack is also not so cool, as heard through the worst car sound system you could imagine. One of the great things about the History of Llamasoft book that Jeff Minter put together is that it includes a lot of diary entries from his father. It's a great thing for a parent to do. Even small things, especially small things, you won't be able to remember even a few years down the road. So keeping a regular diary or journal about what's going on with your kids, it's invaluable. It's hard to do, to find the time to record these memories. For a few months last year, about a year ago, my daughter was attending an acting class every Saturday morning, so I would drop her off, head over to a nearby coffee shop where I'd order a large mocha no whip, sit down, crack open my laptop, and write. Just write about the kids' week, what they did, upcoming events. Each week was different, and I found that I could easily consume an hour doing this. I keep separate journals for my kids, and was able to write in both of them every Saturday morning. I'm not keeping up with that terribly well right now, but kudos to Pat Minter, Jeff's father, for doing this. He sounds like a pretty cool guy. I'd like to speak a little bit about the PlayStation TV, since I mentioned it a few times in this episode. After the fall of Atari, after the Jaguar, I had no brand loyalty when it came to video games. I owned a Sega Dreamcast, the Microsoft Xbox, the original one, and a Nintendo Wii. Just all over the place. So when I was traveling a lot overseas and wanted a portable video game console to take with me, more portable than the Lynx, I didn't have any bias about what to get. I bought a PSP Go because what I really wanted to play were arcade and retro game collections, and it had several available which could be downloaded to the generous 16 gigabytes of internal memory. 2 Capcom collections, SNK, Midway, got the Activision Anthology and the Sega Genesis collection as well. Then I discovered PlayStation Minis, which were games of less than 100 megabytes costing less than $5. A lot of neo-retro games available as minis, and also some classic arcade games as well, like Lock and Chase and Vanguard. So I bought several of these too. Eventually, I bought a 6-axis controller so that I could plug the PSP into the hotel room TV and sit back with a wireless controller. PlayStation 1 games could be downloaded and played as well. Pong, Spyro, that sort of thing. TurboGrafx 16 games. I built up quite a little library of inexpensive retro and retro-feeling games. You may remember that Sony was hacked and the PlayStation Network was offline for several weeks, and as a welcome back sort of measure, Sony gave members a few downloadable games. It was their choice, not mine, which games you get. So I got games like Mod Nation Racers and Pursuit Force and SOCOM Fireteam Bravo 3. No interest in those games, those gigabyte-sized titles. Little Big Planet was pretty cool. I got that one for free too, but I'm mostly into arcade retro console and neo-retro titles. When I looked into getting Minecraft for the kids for Christmas 2014, I had the choice of getting a PlayStation 3 or an Xbox 360. The PS4 and Xbox One were out at the time and had their own versions of Minecraft, which also provided the split-screen gameplay I was after, but I wasn't interested in a new, expensive console when an older, used one would be just fine. As it turns out, many of the games that I bought for my PSP, especially the minis and PS1 games, but a few of the others, could also be downloaded and played on the PlayStation 3 for no additional charge. And since I already had a 6-axis controller, I went with a PS3. The copy of Minecraft available for it also included a code for a free Vita version. I had thought about buying a Vita, mostly because of TXK, but the cost was too high. I couldn't justify buying another portable console, as I said earlier. The PlayStation TV launched in America. It was known as the Vita TV in Japan. And I looked at that as an alternative to buying a Vita. I could get TXK and a large library of my existing games, again, which I could download to it for no additional charge, but it was around $100 for the bare-bones unit, and that was a bit too much. Still, I kept it hanging around my Amazon wishlist. A cool thing about the Amazon wishlist is that you can pull it up periodically to see if the price has dropped on any items you're interested in buying. It says price dropped X%, right next to the item, and one day last summer I saw that the PlayStation TV had dropped to $33. That sounded reasonable, so I bought one. The little black box is filled with ports. There's power, HDMI, Ethernet, USB, but just for charging or pairing controllers, a slot for Sony's expensive proprietary memory cards, and a slot for those little Vita game cartridges, if you can call them cartridges, you know what I mean. The device has 1 gigabyte of internal storage, which isn't very much, but I was able to install TXK, Minecraft, PS1 Pong, and 8 or 9 of the minis I already owned. Oh, and an app for Hulu as well. That's not a bad selection. It's not all sunshine and lollipops, though. Many of the games that I bought for the PSP, which work on the Vita, do not work on the PS TV. Why can I play PS1 games like Mega Man X5 and arcade hits Shenryu, but not Spyro the Dragon or Crash Bandicoot? Lock and Chase, but not Vanguard? Newtopia, but not Bonk's Adventure? Hulu, but not Netflix? I'm not actually a Netflix customer, but a lot of people are. The approved selection seems arbitrary, and not due to technical reasons. Perhaps the game developers choose not to undergo an additional approval process, maybe legal restrictions prevent it, but from an end-user point of view, my point of view, it's capricious and frustrating. I did just recently buy a memory card, $24 for 8 gigabytes, shipped from Japan, and that holds all the compatible titles I own and care about playing, still leaving over 2 gigabytes of free space. The memory card does not supplement but replaces the internal memory, which is kind of odd, but I can live with that. So the PlayStation TV is a case of unrealized potential. It could have been a decent little streaming box with some solid gaming cred, if not for these non-technical limitations in what you can do with it. But to play TXK on the big screen for under $40, provided you already own a 6-axis controller, it's a pretty good deal. Let's see, Bishop, what's the current price for a PlayStation TV on Amazon?
$43.99.
Huh, it's gone up a bit. What's the current price for a 6-axis controller?
$45.32.
Oh.
There is a PlayStation TV and DualShock bundle for $77.
Oh, alright. So with TXK for $10 on the PlayStation Store, starting from scratch, you're looking at a minimum of $90 to play TXK on your TV. But if you can get a used 6-axis or DualShock controller, whatever it's called, I got mine used. That'll save you some money. And you might be able to find a lower price for the PlayStation TV elsewhere. Certainly cheaper than buying a Vita. But kudos to Sony for letting me buy a game once and play it on totally different systems. I like that. I wouldn't say that I'm a Sony or PlayStation fanboy by any stretch, but I do like a reasonable customer experience. I built a swing set for my kids several years back. More of a play structure. Wooden with a roof, slides, climbing wall, that sort of thing. It took way longer to build than I'm willing to admit, but that's a whole other story. Before the kids learned how to pump their legs on the swings to keep themselves propelled, they would ask for a push. And every time I gave them a push, I would say, "Boost!" in reference to Tempest 2000 because, I don't know, it seemed like the right thing to do. That's it for story time. Thank you for joining me, and take care. Welcome once again to the hairdryer model by model. Wait, hold on. Keep forgetting to shut this off before recording. Sorry. Hairdryer model by model podcast, where we talk all about electric hairdryers, one model at a time. In this episode, we are reviewing the Tempest 2000 Salon Turbo Ionic hairdryer by Hot Tools. It has an 8-foot power cord, 8 heat and speed settings with a cool shot option. And if you drop it in a volume of water, it unleashes the Super Zapper. And trust me, you do not want to do that.